All right, we're back. Floyd, you are back in the studio.
Nick, it's so good to be here again. Love your studio.
Yeah. It takes us a while to get it up and running, but then eventually we figured it out. So Floyd Marinescu, I got that. I remember I got it right from last time.
Yep.
So for anyone that doesn't remember, last time you were here, we were talking about land value tax, talked about yourself. What's the organization that you started around that?
CommonWealth Canada is researching land value tax, its impact on the housing market. And then another org called UBI Works that is promoting basic income in Canada on top of my software developer education business. So these are all my three big projects.
Yeah, and that's what we were going to dive into today. You know, we did the land value tax stuff, and with that, some of the things probably cross over a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
And then the UBI we'll talk about today because it's a little bit of a I don't want to say controversial topic, but I think there's definitely multiple differing views on it, right? Yeah. So it's interesting to kind of dive into it a little bit. And I guess something that's really where this is going to become very interesting pretty quick with UBI is a lot of things to do with AI, automation, yes, of course, and AI then specifically because of the impact that will have on even a greater amount of jobs, right? And I guess that's where you're seeing that this is now, correct me if I'm wrong, like now you feel like this is more of the time when UBI is going to become more important or more essential, maybe is the right way to frame it.
Yeah, I mean, now people are seeing in their own lived experience, we're seeing headlines of job losses. You know, we're seeing graphics artists losing their jobs, radiologists, people, x-ray technicians, call center workers, across the board. We're seeing ChatGPT and similar technologies causing huge displacements in work. Where people literally just went to college 10 years ago as a graphics artist, then get fired from their jobs because companies can do a lot more with less.
Mm-hmm. Are we seeing things like the radiologists and things like that yet? Or is it just like the potential for that coming down the pipe?
We're seeing it now. I mean, I have a friend who's a doctor's friend and told me in preparation for this interview that they got a notice saying that you can now realize greater efficiencies by simply using the software that will scan the x-rays and automatically take pictures of any anomalous readings. You don't need an x-ray technician to do that anymore. So you can downgrade. You can have one technician that just manages all the hardware on a floor instead of like multiple technicians per machine. So we're seeing this across the board. I mean, we're seeing this in legal, in accounting, AI creating, as we mentioned earlier, first drafts of things. You don't need junior people producing that work. Just yesterday, I used ChatGPT to create a legal contract for a sale and purchase agreement that normally I would have gone to a lawyer for, and is good enough. I know it's good enough through my own experience. So people are saving a lot of money, a lot of time using software, but that ends up means less economic activity, less demand for wage labor in jobs that used to do work that currently can be done by generative AI.
You know what scares me about all this, and I agree with what you're saying about the economy and stuff. I want to come back to that in a second, but the whole ChatGPT thing, or any of the other ones, it's the lack of people that are willing to look a little bit further and see if it's actually accurate. So you felt yours was accurate, whatever it was looking up for you, the legal clause or whatever you needed.
Just need a few tweaks, that's it.
Through your own experience, because you've had some of that experience, so you kind of felt comfortable with it. But for someone that just has no experience, if it's spitting off something that's inaccurate or incorrect, it's a problem. It isn't like sometimes I look at society in general, and one of the challenges that I see is that we're so busy or we're so preoccupied, or there's so many things, chasing our attention, that there's a lot less people going deep into a topic and getting that understanding and that true kind of like wisdom level of knowledge in a topic. And if we're programming ourselves just to take whatever these machines spit out as fact, or as that's everything we got, I feel like it's from the productivity standpoint, yeah, it might be a step forward, but if it's not used right, it's like a step backwards, isn't it? Not even from the UBI, not productivity or anything. I just mean from just like humanity.
Well, it's already happening. We're seeing a pandemic in universities of people using ChatGPT to submit essays, to submit theses. Yeah. I heard recently that in biotech related degrees, the word unpacking has appeared 80% more in the last few years of submissions than it did before. And unpacking comes from psychology. It's about like separating your emotions and thinking it through. But ChatGPT got trained on a lot of that material and is producing new titles, is producing things across disciplines using this word. It's evidence, it's just kind of anecdotal evidence of how many people are using it in school, and they're saving time, but also not learning as much.
Yeah.
So in the labor force, I mean, it's known that this will actually replace a lot of the entry-level jobs. So the kind of jobs you would do to develop the wisdom to become an expert, those things get done for you. So the learning of the future will be something pretty different, like maybe more first principles, working with software to get over the humps that you used to learn on your own. I don't know how that's going to go. That's
and this is kind of your world, your realm a little bit, because I know you focus on the UBI Works and the
CommonWealth Canada.
CommonWealth Canada. Now more, but you come from a software background where you had a software company that you ended up selling, right? Just for context.
No, I didn't sell it. I still have it. So we run large trade shows for software engineers, like 1,500 attendees, 100 speakers, like 50 vendors, in New York, San Francisco, London. We were in China and Brazil, and I'm worried because some experts, the CEO of NVIDIA, is saying that there'll be no need for coding jobs. That AI will be producing software, and already we're seeing AI can produce a lot of the scaffolding, the kind of the busy work of software development that can aid expert software developers to be more productive. That junior developers used to do. But that's just the beginning, right? Like in 10 years, what if you can actually just talk to AI to produce software that can create websites and can create all kinds of back-end engineering? So I'm actually worried about the longevity of my own business with this, because if not enough engineers, who's going to buy tickets to come to my trade shows? So this happened to my father and uncle. They were in Ontario's automotive manufacturing sector. And between 98 and 2010, there was a mass automation wave to respond to Chinese competition in manufacturing. The industry contracted by 50%. Meanwhile, production increased, but employment contracted, because in any time of crisis, businesses will reach out to technologies that are available in order to optimize and get more efficient. And they lost their jobs. And what happens when the jobs are displaced by technology? They have to end up working for lower incomes, because the thing they were trained to do, there's no longer enough jobs available for that anymore. So people who spend their whole lives training and getting really good at something now have to go and do something that they were never trained for at lower pay. And that's what we're seeing. We'll be seeing that across the board in the next 3 to 5 years for white-collar jobs, for all kinds of jobs.
And that's where there's something, and with the situation they're in, if that's the case, and that's why a lot of people, and ourselves included, I think it's, nothing's a foregone conclusion, but I think the probability of some form of UBI being implemented in Canada in the, relatively near future, so, maybe near to medium term, I think it's very real. And this is one of the reasons behind it.
There's many reasons for a basic income. I mean, the best reasons that are timeless. We almost had basic income in the late 60s when it nearly passed in the U.S. Congress. But basic income is ultimately about helping people in times of transition. Whether you're a student, you're an entrepreneur, you're a parent, it's having that extra income so you don't fall into poverty when you're working from one thing to another. It's also a more efficient replacement for the social assistance system, the welfare programs as we know them, because it removes disincentives to work. It removes the welfare trap. So for many reasons, basic income is a more dignified, a more efficient, a smaller government, frankly, approach to income assistance programs. But automation puts it in the spotlight.
So then how does it remove the disincentives to work versus like a welfare system, like you mentioned? Right.
So if you, imagine, let me start with a more populist answer. Imagine during the pandemic crisis, right? We had CERB in Canada. In US, we had something like CERB through the employment benefits.
Well, isn't that essentially UBI? In a very broad form?
Limited, yes. So imagine if during the pandemic, the government said, well, instead of helping you out with this temporary cash, you just go sell all your assets because you have assets. Sell your assets, and then eventually when you have nothing, then come to us and we'll give you some money to survive. Can you imagine the carnage that would have happened in the economy? Mass selling off of assets, people are running, it would be insane. So the welfare programs are like that. You don't qualify unless you lose everything. So, and then when you're on it, you lose the benefit when you go back to work. meaning that if you get a job, you immediately lose all of the basic income. And unfortunately, a lot of people who have been in or near poverty for a long time can only get very low income jobs or very disparate jobs. We're seeing, in addition, a falling of quality of low income work through the gig economy, through the gigification of jobs, slicing and dicing into all these different parts, often managed by AI. And so what happens is if you work, you lose your welfare check, you lose the benefit, and often you're trading a small amount of welfare for a slightly more amount of work income, but you're losing a lot in that regard. So what a basic income does is says you can keep much of this income as you work. So it's more like unemployment insurance, where a typical scheme in Canada is that for every dollar you earn from your job, you lose 50 cents of the benefit from your basic income. That means that if you have a $24,000, let's say you have a basic income of $24,000, right? So,
yeah, I want to come back to the example. You said a basic example in Canada. Was this being used somewhere in Canada or no?
I'm saying that the proposals for basic income are often for something called a guaranteed basic income, which is an income guarantee that the less money you make from work, the higher the benefited amount up to the poverty line. And then obviously the converse is true. Like as you earn an income, you lose the benefit slowly, and eventually you don't have it anymore. But that's not how welfare works. You lose it immediately.
Yeah, gotcha. So what is the poverty line in Canada? What is it considered?
It depends on the region, but I would say I think it's probably around like 20,000
roughly. Yeah, which 20,000 a year doesn't
especially
get you
here in
very far
Ontario.
around here. Okay, and you were going to use an example. So let's use an example. I think you were saying 24,000 is.
So with CERB in Canada, if you worked, you immediately lost all $2,000 a month. You lost it immediately, right?
Yeah.
That's what even the conservatives are saying. Make it have a clawback. Make it so that you can work and you lose part of your CERB benefit, like 50 cents per dollar earned. So basic income guarantees work the same way. So if you're making, let's say you temporarily go on basic income because you're retraining for a job, or you're going to school, or you have a business idea, and then eventually start to earn an income. If you're earning $20,000 a year from a job, and the basic income is $24,000, you would lose $10,000 off the basic income, because it's for every dollar you earn, you lose 50 cents of the benefit.
Okay.
That means you keep $20,000 and you also keep $14,000 more. So your total income is $34,000. So you're encouraged to work, because if you don't work, you only have 24. If you work and you earn 20,000, you have 34, or eventually you can reach close to 40,000. So it's like a supplement on working incomes that ensures no one's in working poverty, because 2/3 of people in poverty are working.
And if we feel that there's technology coming around that is going to displace a number of jobs, then this type of in one way, shape, or form, this ends up becoming more important as people lose their incomes or their income.
So it becomes an emergency for transition times. People need to go back to school, but it also becomes a supplement, because unfortunately the labor market has failed to produce enough high quality jobs, enough middle income jobs. There's a lot more low income jobs where 2/3 of people in poverty are working, which we should all be up in arms about that. And this is not about minimum wage, because that won't solve all of those issues. But a basic income forms a supplement that allows people to work and still have a decent life. And that's why it solves the work disincentive, because with a basic income guarantee, you keep part of the income. If it's truly universal basic income, you keep it all. You keep the dividend, as it's called often in the U.S., and you still can build your work on top of it.
So you must get this asked, I would think, all the time. Maybe it's not, but then the initial question that probably comes to a lot of people's mind is like, okay, this from a social aspect, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because I agree with you about, there's obvious poverty issues in and around the GTA right now. Like it's you don't have to drive far to see them. But where does the money come from this?
Right.
Like to support the programs.
Yeah, there are many ways to pay for basic income, as many as there are ways to pay for any program. It really depends on the politics.
Extra tax.
It really depends on the politics of whoever's implementing it. We've at UBI Works, we've put out a tax plan that would primarily fall on the financial sector, on tax breaks used by large corporations or wealthy individuals, so that it would not cost working people. If you look at the overall 50-year trends, across the Western world, more money is being made by capital than by labor. So the amount of money going to working people is declining. So, and technology is a huge aspect of this, as well as how the real estate market functions, frankly, where a lot more income is going to owners of assets, whether they're technological assets or literally real estate assets, than are going to working people. So over time, that means we need to find a way to share in the value creation that is going to asset and technology owners. And that would be an ideal and a virtuous cycle way to fund a basic income so that they still have customers. Because eventually you won't have any more customers if working people are just losing money. And from a macro trend perspective, we can see that between 1998 and 2010, GDP in the US grew by 42%, but the number of hours worked stayed the same, even though the population grew by 40 million. Do you think about that for a moment? Like the economy increased by 42%, but the number of hours worked stayed the same. That means we're doing more with less. So you can imagine these examples now with ChatGPT helping people do more with less. That means that there's less demand for workers, less demand, which would drive up wages. Wages stay stagnant. Meanwhile, cost of living is going up and people are getting poorer. So that something's got to give. And a basic income can be seen in a couple of ways. One is for emergency scenarios, people aren't in abject poverty, but also for ongoing, it's a way to kind of share in some of the gains that are happening due to all this prosperity, due to automation, that we need to find a way to share, or else we're not going to have any more customers. We're not going to have a functioning market system. Yeah,
I agree with that there's something very wrong. The structure of the current system is very wrong. I'm just wondering, because you said there was more money made by capital versus income, and that makes sense. Is that a byproduct though of what a lot of the kind of financial policy that we've had, where the money supply has grown so much, and when they've grown the money supply and put the money into the economy, and I used to call it basic income for wealthy people, essentially, because the money went to the asset prices first. It went to the assets first. And we really got this asset inflation. And that's why there was money made by capital, because all the assets went up in value, and the people that didn't have assets, they were just earning income, they weren't able to keep up. And we mapped out the prices of real estate compared to the average from 69. We went back on the Toronto Real Estate Board, and we mapped out the prices, the average price of the Toronto Real Estate Board compared to the average Canadian income. And the gap from 69 to now is just enormous. Like it's what we call the destruction of the middle class. But isn't that more of a factor of what we've done with the value of our money and the money system than it is with just kind of the way the system is structured against people? Like, I'm talking the money system versus the economy as a whole.
Yeah, so that's a very, very interesting question. First, before I answer that question, I'll answer a question that people who hold that view would have. Basic income will not drive inflation because no one's proposing that it be funded through money printing. It's redistributive, or ideally it's pre-distributive, meaning it's coming from sources of value creation that are unearned, sources of monopoly profits, for instance. There's no evidence that basic income would drive inflation, so just get it off the table. But to your question, I think our addiction to printing money is more like adding gasoline to a problem that was already there. We've had booms and busts in the housing market long before the gold standard was a thing, going back to like the 18th century. Any free market, as demand increases, there's going to be bubbles in anything, because people pile in and then it kind of like comes off. And I agree. That makes sense. So I don't think that the printing money has had that big of an impact on these particular dynamics that are causing lack of wage growth for workers. I think maybe lack of disposable income, perhaps, if asset prices are being, again, the gasoline's poured on, they're growing way faster than they should. But so does deregulation of bank credit, right? Like private banks print money when they issue mortgages. Yes. Right. And no one ever talks about that. Everyone's always talking about government printing money, but private banks print more money than the government do to issue mortgages. So like there's so many factors here, right? It's too complex for me to point to one thing. Yeah. But when they lower rates, so if they lower lending rates, then the likelihood and the banks, the money creation comes from the banks when they put out loans and mortgages and things like that. Yeah. But by the government lowering rates to afford, let's say, even their debt or whatever the case may be, isn't that contributing to that same cycle that we can't get out of at this point? Yes. So if you imagine your average working person, right? Their expenses are going up from the bottom. Their expenses are increasing in part because of this, what you're saying, because of lowered interest rates and
fiscal
much
policy,
deregulated bank
monetary
credit.
policy, but either one.
Because-
Even with, and sorry to interrupt for a second,
Yeah.
because you said it's not inflationary, which it doesn't have to be depending on how it's done. But you're right. Like if you looked at, if we're not doing it with money creation, but if you look at the COVID time, if you do it with government debt, then it's very obviously, just from recent examples, it's hard to argue that it wouldn't be inflationary. But if it's redistribution, that's different, which is what you're saying. This is a redistribution, not increased debt, right?
Yeah, or ideally a pre-distribution. So, so I don't think that the money printing has been a factor in why wages aren't growing. It may be a factor in why disposable income is decreasing. But a lot of research has looked into this and found that over half of the impact on changing wage composition in the U.S. is due to automation. In the end, it means less money goes to workers, more money goes to company owners, to owners of assets, and that would inhibit wage growth. It doesn't really change expense increasing. That has to do other factors, like I think our relationship to money, overall incentives in the housing market that are driving prices up higher than they have to be. Speculative incentives, all of those things.
So I guess I'm just wondering which direction to go in here, because I want to ask you a couple of things.
Yeah.
And one's a little bit off topic, but I think let's just touch on this. So, because one of the ways I look at things is, I'm not against UBI. I think our social program, you have much more trust in the government than I do, because I just think any tax and redistribute scheme or pre-distribute, anything the government's involved in, in my experience, what I've seen, even the land value tax, when you spoke about it, in theory, it all makes sense. I don't have trust in our government to implement it in such a way that there's not such a huge amount of waste that it works. And I've seen that, and we've seen that with everything else. So just like, because there's been a lot of uproar recently about the capital gains tax, right? And not uproar, but some people disagree with it, and I've seen other people saying, "Well, it's about time, those people, because they're getting an unfair share of profits, so it's about time they pay more," and things like that. And I can understand both positions. And then sometimes, Tom and I will be talking, and we look at it, we're like, "Oh, this is very interesting," because we earn income, and they tax us on this income, right? So now we have less made, and then as a defensive mechanism. Then to protect my purchasing power of my savings, I feel like I have to go buy some sort of asset, because I'm like, well, if I leave it in the bank, the value of it just diminishes. So I'm like, I'm going to go buy some sort of asset because I'm playing defense against the government policy, against this money printing policy. And now, because of money creation, you can call it, whether it's interest rate, fiscal or monetary policy, whichever side you want to say, but there is more dollars in the economy. The asset values have, I don't even look often at the asset values going up, and we map the asset values against M2. I'll show you that chart in a second. Okay. So now the price tag on it has gone up because the number of dollars, the purchasing power of the dollars has been diminished. I got to pay more. Now they're taxing me on that. So because of the way they've managed this money, I'm getting taxed again. I'm just trying to play defense. So that's the problem I have with the capital gains tax. I'm like, well, I don't really like it, that aspect of it. But then the other side is that I have zero faith that the increase in tax is going to increase standard of living in Canada for anyone. And I guess maybe I'm a pessimist. I don't know. But that's the problem. Because if I felt that the tax was going to build bridges and going to build roads and going to build social housing and making the community better, I'd be like, well, yeah, this makes sense. Like, okay, if I'm earning a little bit more and I've benefited from some things, I'm like, yeah, I get it. But I think it's going to go and it's going to be frittered away into bullshit studies and God knows what else. And I used to be a government worker, and I've seen the inside working of some regional government offices. And I could tell you that at that time, a long time ago, maybe it's changed, there was a whole ton of waste going on. So that's where I'm coming from this side of things, where I'm like, I challenge the more regulation and the redistribution is going to make any sense. And I guess this doesn't...
Let's address that. I mean, that's very fair points. Basic income is deregulation of poverty. So think about it. It's taking power away from these government programs that subject people to all kinds of conditions, waste their time, keep people employed, like just controlling other people about whether they deserve some support or not. It's deregulating that, and just to direct cash transfer. The overhead of cash-based transfer support programs is under 2%. I think it's even under 0.5%. So if you want to reduce the size of government, but yet also have a system where we take care of those in need and provide people support in times of transition, basic income is the best way to do that. That's why Milton Friedman, like an icon in conservative economist thought, he was for it. He was for something called the negative income tax, where you reject the tax system. So if you make less than a certain amount, you're actually getting money from the tax system, and if you're making more, you're paying out more. And it's dignified. All you have to do to qualify is fill out a tax return. Poor people are not treated worse than rich people. Everyone's treated the same. So it is a way to deregulate the poverty industry and reduce the influence of government there. So
I like that you said the poverty industry, because I think that's an important part. Yeah.
So it is lower overhead. So if you think, what is size of government? Is it just cash flows, or is it employment and wasted time?
Well, in Canada, it's employment now. I don't know if you've seen the recent numbers. I mean, our economy, the only growth in our economy is basically coming, and in employment is basically coming from the public sector.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. It's I want to know what everyone's doing, but I would argue to your readers that a tax that supports a basic income is not regulation. It is simply another way of recirculating in oftentimes idle wealth in a way that helps the economy, because people spend in the local economy. In fact, a study that we commissioned from the Canadian Centre of Economics Analysis showed that a basic income in Canada could grow the economy by $80 billion a year, that create 500,000 jobs, because this people are spending to their adequate need means more people are on the receiving end in businesses to take the spending. More jobs are being there's more jobs being created, and the economy works better because people are an asset. If a huge swath of the population is under basic needs, they're not spending to the point even of basic subsistence, then that's an asset we can improve, so that everyone can participate and everyone can work and we're spending at an adequate level without poverty in the country.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there could be, and that makes sense? And I'm just wondering, because one thing that I've always looked at, and I go back to the money, because I just think our money's so broken.
Macro
right?
guy too. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's decimated, and this doesn't solve the income component. But if we had a money that held its value, if someone is below the poverty line, but they're busting their ass, they're working 2 jobs, they're delivering for Uber, they have a full-time job, and they're busting their ass, and they're able to kind of make ends meet and put some savings aside. It's not even a huge amount, but they're someone that wants to, maybe it's own a property or whatever it is. So they're saving for something, right? Some people don't want that, and you don't have to want that. Not everyone needs that or wants that. That's fine. But this person is. Now, in our system now, they aren't able to get further ahead, because anytime that they're saving for something, that, I shouldn't say anytime, but the vast majority of time, if you use housing as an example, that just gets inflated away. So as they're saving, their savings can't keep up, of whether it's a down payment or incomes or whatever the case may be. If we had a more sound money system that then was able to hold that purchasing power for that person, so that they were able to then lift themselves out of poverty because they were able to maintain their savings and their savings held value, isn't that a means to also fix a lot of the problems, like especially when it comes to poverty and things like that? Because I know you're coming at it from an income component, which that's important, especially with job loss and things like that. But if we're just doing the income component without fixing the money as well, aren't we only fixing half the problem, and the problem's still not going to be fixed, because those people aren't going to be able to get further? Some basic needs might be met, but if we're still operating the same system, they're not going to be able to get further ahead, no matter what happens.
Well, if you're talking about asset purchases, sure, but I mean, most people in poverty are renting. I'm not sure that this would have a huge impact on how the rent.
No, but I'm saying if they want, they're trying to get out of renting. They're trying to get out of the apartment building they're in, and maybe they want to own just anything. Because if you look at trying to get out of poverty, I guess I'm looking at owning some sort of asset, which is, I feel like that's probably considered in some ways getting out of poverty is when you are able to start owning assets. That is one definition of getting above the poverty line.
I mean, would it help people to enter the middle class? I don't know if I would agree that about getting out of poverty, but entering the middle class, sure. I mean, anything that stabilizes prices and price growth would certainly help. I do think, again, the mindset of someone who has money, who wants to park it in assets to avoid inflation, certainly acknowledge that. I think there are many factors that are driving up housing price inflation. And I think the money supply is just one, and other issues are incentives, speculative incentives, deregulation of bank credit, our relationship to land value.
Sorry, yeah. So
under construction, all these things.
Okay, so remove real estate. Maybe it's a bad example.
Okay.
Let's talk about the cost of steaks.
Sure.
Because like it's the same thing. Like if this person's trying to save, then they're not going to be able to wait. If you looked at the price of beef over the last couple of years, like someone that had some savings now is not able to eat the same way that they were eating, and they want to enjoy steaks. They're on a keto diet, whatever the case may be. But I understand there's more factors in real estate, but I just mean I just feel like it's, with recently what we've seen, it's the price of everything has gone up. And if in a UBI world, what would we have done in that case? Because their incomes haven't changed, so that's still one problem. They've now they have a little bit of UBI coming in, so they've balanced that out. But the costs have increased so much for people, their now standard of living is dropping again because they can't afford the steak anymore. They're buying ground beef, or they're not buying ground beef, they're buying hot dogs, whatever it is, because of the costs.
We should do anything that can slow down price increasing. And if fixing a relationship to the money supply is that, we should do that. I don't think that these should be linked in a way that not doing a basic income should wait till we solve the monetary policy, because at the end of the day, like keeping people from losing it all and falling to poverty now is an urgent priority right now. Mm-hmm. And if someone can be living at subsistence, they can have opportunities to look for work, to retrain, and that's right now, and that's urgent for a lot of people. Certainly the monetary policy issues are things that we should keep talking about. I think coming back to automation, what I'm saying is the research shows that at least half of the impact on changing wage distribution, on changes of wage growth, on stopping wages from growing in real terms, has to do with technology. And maybe the other half has to do with losing the gold standard. I don't know. But technology is a major factor. And if you take the example I gave earlier, that number of hours worked in the U.S. stayed the same over 12 years, but meanwhile GDP went up. That means less money is going to working people, more money is going to the wealthy. And in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see that turbocharge. We're seeing university-educated people taking jobs that used to be done by college-educated people. College-educated people used to taking jobs used to be done by high school-educated people, and other people being forced into poverty. It's affecting people who have a high school diploma are the worst affected in today's economy due to the lack of jobs that pay enough, lack of wage demand. So I think the fact that businesses can do more with less, that you can actually make. I saw a stat that used to take I don't remember the exact stat right now, but there's a graph showing how many employees it would take to make $1 million.
Oh, yeah. And
it went from hundreds down to 13 or something.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah.
So that's real, and that's not really. I don't think that's related to the money supply. I think that's related to the impact of technology on that workforce.
You're right. I agree with that, and I think the concentration of power and wealth that the technology is causing is it's just increasing faster and faster. Like you said, in the next 5 years, it's just going to be faster than the previous 5. It's hard. It's definitely hard to ignore that, because Jeff Booth, I still refer to his book, The Price of Tomorrow. It's just such a great book. And I guess it's the first one that made me really clear on basically we're living in a world that should be a deflationary world because of technology. And then there's these the system has to fight against that deflation because of all the debt in the world everywhere, and then it's causing these imbalances all over the place. And it's going to be really weird to see, because there's some lawyers, I guess, there's going to be trial lawyers, for example, that go into the courtroom and they're serving a different purpose than maybe a ChatGPT could or would at this time. I don't even know. I haven't seen an example of that yet, but I'm sure that's coming down the pipe. Versus a lawyer that's closing a real estate deal, which is a pretty transactional process. There's sometimes things blow up a little bit. For the most part, it's pretty straightforward. I don't see why the cost of that can't come down a lot, and because of the automation around it.
Well, it'll come down somewhat, but then the real estate firms will be making more profits because you need less staff to execute, right? 100%. Or there'll be a technology company that comes, does it, and then it just gets all rolled up
into that company, no different than some of the other technology companies we're seeing today. Like Google's a great example. I mean, there's lots of them, right? Amazon, there's all sorts of ones where they have that advantage, and then just the profits go there, and they just slow as they grow. They just grow faster and faster as it all goes there.
Well, I'm glad that Jeff Booth had a bit of a heyday moment during the pandemic. He was arguing that we should allow deflation, but that also means allow the housing market to contract, and that's politically too much suicide.
Yeah, Trudeau just came out. Did you see yesterday?
No.
Trudeau just came out with a quote yesterday. I could look it up about the. I believe it was yesterday. I don't know. I saw it yesterday. That about the housing market and the prices, and he's like, yes, we need affordable housing, but they have to watch the housing prices because of people's retirements as well. So like you said, from a political standpoint, it's very hard for them to allow that to kind of come down in a meaningful way.
That's right. So if you take a futurist long-term view that now, yes, technology should lead to deflation of goods and services, but it can't lead to deflation of land value. That is fundamentally inflationary, has been since the dawn of mankind. And this relates to our last podcast, that we're in a system that as long as land value, not land tenure, but land value is privatized, you'll always have a working poor that is working to keep up with the costs of housing, because another class of society owns the housing and is reaping in the benefit of rising land values that they never earned, because rising land values comes from public investment, it comes from technological progress, it comes from the growth, health of communities. So that's why Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, his proposal for a UBI in the US is twofold. You need a land value tax of 2.5%, so that rising land values that are always capturing society's progress can be used to actually help people that otherwise would be harming them, because they're paying an ever increasing rent. Meanwhile, their wage growth has been decreased by automation. And he wants to see a share dilution tax on mega corporations. So the largest companies of over $1 billion of revenue a year, should actually give 2.5% of their shares to a fund, to an investment fund run by the government that distributes dividends back to society.
See, you had me until you said run by the government.
Run by the government. Yeah.
I'm just like, man, I'm gone again. No, I get it.
Who are we going to turn to for help?
No,
we have mass unemployment, the government, right? So we have the choice.
The challenge, though. I've seen the level of waste. Yeah,
there's waste, but there's a small government way to address it. Giving people cash is small government. Guaranteeing people jobs is big government, right? The jobs guarantee idea is crazy. It seems
we got to change. I think we have to change. I think for this to work, well, the government side of it, the political incentive has to change, because to get elected every 4 years, you just make promises. They just figured out, okay, well, who do we promise money to give us the votes, and or to even circle back the money into our campaign for marketing and all this stuff, right? It's a little bit of a circular economy going on there.
Well, Trudeau showed you it's retirees and homeowners, right?
Yeah, he just came out and then in the US too, the lobbying industry is just we have it exists in Canada, but it's a fraction of what it is in the US, and it's just this circular economy basically that's happening there, and so it's weird. I want to come back to the land value tax thing for a second, because I'm curious what arguments the couple main arguments you get against that, because wouldn't someone say, well, they pay property tax, so when they've purchased and they've paid property tax into the community, then they get the benefit from the roads and things like that because they've paid into that system. Is that not? Does that?
Yeah, that is true. But there's a theoretical amount from 0 to 100% of the rental value of land that could be taxed, that you could say is created by the community, created by technological progress, and not by the homeowner, right? So currently, I think the land value tax part of a property tax is very small. It's maybe 0.5%, right? So the value of land comes from its rental value. That's a way to think about the value of land. Its rental value gives it its future value, gives it its speculative value. So I think at 0.5%, that's probably capturing maybe 10% of the rental value of land. So to actually fully capture the amount of land value created by society, it would have to be much more than that. It would have to be, I think, by my last calculations, close to 2.5%, depending on the region, what the cap rates are in different regions. Location. Maybe as high as 5%, in order so that actual society's progress has been taxed and then given back to people who created it, which is workers and businesses. And instead, we could actually reduce other taxes, no income taxes, no capital gains taxes at all. So we're not talking about robbing homeowners. We're saying rejigging how we contribute, how we fund government. And it's better to tax something that you didn't earn, which is land value, than tax something that you earned, which is your incomes.
Yeah. So I've paid property tax, but if I have a property close to a GO station, as an example, and I've paid property tax there, it's, my land value, I've contributed to community a little bit, but I really haven't contributed to the increase in value of that land because of the GO station.
That's right. So maybe you contributed 10% of what was actually created by society, and you're keeping the rest. Mm-hmm. Well, Sam Altman and many others are saying, well, if we're moving to a jobless future where money is coming into asset holders, we should be taxing asset growth and not workers. And asset growth, which is created by technology, it can create a virtuous cycle by which everyone has enough money to spend because we have UBI, and then you make more money from entrepreneurial activities because it's taxed less, and the asset value growth created by technological progress comes back to everyone in like a virtuous cycle. That's not what we're doing today. We're doing the opposite. We're taxing productivity. Meanwhile, that's why governments are often starved for cash, because the middle class is shrinking. There's not enough of a tax base. More money is going to capital, and capital gains are still taxed way less than incomes. So we're doing kind of the opposite. We have an industrial aged tax system as opposed to a technological aged tax system. Which is, again, why Sam Altman believes we should be looking at the super profits of mega corporations using AI, looking at a growth in land value as a means of paying for a true universal basic income where everyone gets a share, not just those who are in need.
I forget, were you born here?
I was born in Canada. Yeah.
You were born in Canada. And your parents was it Romanian?
They're from Romania.
Romania.
Yeah, good memory.
So, so they came here. You went to school here.
That's right.
And then
University of Waterloo for computer science.
Okay. And then did you start your business right after that?
Yeah, I was working halfway through university. I worked for a US-based tech training startup, and then 5 years later started my own business. So just doing tech media. Most of the revenues of my business are US and European based, but we're a Canadian-based corporation.
And this is the same business you still have today.
That's right. Yeah.
So what drove you from that? I'm just curious. I'm curious of the journey, right? Because you. I think the UBI Works was started before Commonwealth Canada, correct?
That's right.
So how did the journey for you go from computer science grad, right? So you started your own business. I can kind of get a sense of, maybe that you wanted to do your own thing. I'm not sure. Maybe there's something there. But then when did you start coming into this world and dabbling here? And what was the driving force for you to start, because some people will form opinions and be like, I really think this, but you didn't just form an opinion. You're like, hey, I want to fund some studies. I want to start like an organization around it. You're investing time and energy into this. Where did this come from?
I think all of us want to live in a world where the next generation is better off than the last. And I think very people will agree that it's actually occurring. Maybe in some segments it's occurring. And as I became successful, 20 years in the tech industry, 15 years running my own business, I just started to look at those issues more. Once I became out of my own poverty and scarcity mindset to business success, I started thinking more about, well, what does society need? Looking back at my own story, growing up in a working poor family, money was was a cause for a lot of conflict, and don't want other people to go through what I went through, especially in this time of great abundance, of all this progress. Like, why is it that almost invariably the better an economy gets, the more poverty it creates? Because things aren't quite structured properly so that progress generally benefits everyone. The rising tide is not lifting all boats, it's lifting some boats at the top. So I just started thinking about that, and it bothered me. And I think in 2017, I heard Elon Musk mention basic income. I never even heard of that before. I had no idea that was even a thing. I'm like, holy cow, you can have a market system, a free exchange economy, not socialist, like an economy where everyone has freedom guaranteed and no poverty. Like, shit, why don't we already have it? And I found out that, well, people have been talking about this for hundreds of years, and it almost passed U.S. Congress under Nixon, lost by a couple of votes in the Senate to the Democrats, saying it wasn't generous enough. I just became very passionate about it, and I started learning about it and researching about it, and created this advocacy org called UBI Works that promotes it in Canada, and to try and help this become a more mainstream political issue in the country. And then in the context of those several years between 2019 and 2023, advocating for basic income in my spare time, and funding it from the proceeds of my business, I learned more about economics, more about history, and learned how historically our relationship to land value has been a huge cause of a lot of the reasons why we have poverty, a lot of reasons why technological progress is not benefiting everyone equally. And when I say land value, I also mean monopoly value. Anything where there's monopoly controlling interest in something that where other people have to pay to exist, pay to have the basic needs to subsist, that kind of economic transaction is really not capitalist. Actually, it's feudalist. It's rivalrous, where if you have to pay for the basic needs you need to exist, then there'll always be working poverty, because people who own stuff will always end up charging more. And like we don't want that, right? We want a better future. Like, as someone who grew up watching Star Trek, like, Star Trek is better than Star Wars. In Star Wars, you're projecting wars and competition over scarce resources that we know today, very familiar with those today. In Star Trek, you have a system where people can pursue their potential, basic needs are met, and people can go into commerce if they want, or they can go into exploration or philosophy or science. Like, we want that. We want shorter work weeks, right? And I think technology is already driving us to shorter work weeks, but it's driving it by taking incomes away from people, forcing people to do 2 or 3 or 4 jobs. And we shouldn't glorify that, because people who are hustling, they're not hustling to, in many cases, to save, to buy a house. They're hustling just to survive. So if we had a basic income, we're correct for that. You could just have 1 job or 1.5 jobs.
Yeah, the hustle culture, like if you're trying to get a business off the ground and you're like, hey, you're going to grind and you got to like work at it to build momentum to get it going. That's one thing about hustle. But the hustle culture of like, I need 4 jobs to make ends meet. It's
nuts.
Yeah.
And thank goodness in this country, in Canada, we have the Canada Child Benefit, which means single moms or working poor parents have that extra bit of support. So maybe they can only have 1 job each, and they can have more time with their kids. Imagine if we didn't have the Canada Child Benefit, how much less time would parents have with their children? How many more children would be leading to a future that is worse off for them, than it would be if we had the Canada Child Benefit, which is like a basic income. It's just not as big as a basic income, but if you can get up to $600 per child based on your level of income, like, thank goodness we have that. It's decent. But to your next question, so I did basic income for a while. I learned then about housing and land value tax and this concept called economic rents. Economic rents is a term used in economics to outline unearned income from monopoly power. And, a lot of the profits of Bell and Rogers would be considered an economic rent, because they possess a limited competition product that we all need. We all need cell phones, so they can just jack up prices. So in a true capitalist country, goods would cost what its true competitive value is to create those goods. But when you have rents, when you have monopoly powers, not enough competition, things that end up costing much more. And that's something that's not talked about enough.
So in that case...
So I started CommonWealth Canada to look at that side of things, and research how we can actually fix these capture the rents for public benefit, which could pay a dividend or could pay basic income, maybe not. And it turns out from our early research on land value tax, just to finish that thought, we'll be fixing this over the next several months. But what we're seeing is that if you did a high enough land value tax to meaningfully stop the growth in housing prices for like a few decades, or even reduce prices, the best way to deal with that money is to actually give it back to people as household rebates, like the carbon rebate. Because if you do that, most households come out with tax relief. And if you can propose LVT as a tax relief package that solves the housing crisis, that's fucking awesome, right? So that's a small government approach, because the money's coming back to people. It's not funding programs.
I haven't looked at I haven't wanted to look at the details. I haven't spent the time to look at the details of the report that was released about the carbon rebate. And I know they say that there was 8 out of 10 Canadians finish ahead. I don't believe it. And I could be, look, I'm,
Sure,
it's just me.
Enough.
I'm just curious what they take into account, because I'm like, are they taking into account the cost of my food to travel to the grocery store? You know what I mean? Like, at what level are they taking that into account? Because if they're just taking in my gas bill, well, yeah, I probably finish ahead. But if they're taking into account how much of that gets passed on to the consumer through increased costs elsewhere, I'm not sure that I buy it. But I haven't looked at the details, so admittedly I don't really know what they're saying in that number.
Take all that into account. I think they probably have, but I don't know.
Well, there's two differing. I think there's 2 differing opinions. There's 2 different reports out. One that says one thing, one from another, and they're one will serve one political party and one will serve the other political party, right? So, with all this research you've done in this stuff, then what do you think? What are your thoughts around? Because you were talking about the cell phone companies and the way that competition would work and kind of help in that scenario, or some would help in a oligopoly like that. I guess we could probably call it that. It's close to it, right? What about the healthcare system, though? Because if we're looking at our healthcare system through the same lens, then isn't there a lot of problems there that we should like where we kind of almost need some pride, like the incentive to be profitable and to do it in a responsible way just isn't there. And so then aren't we running into into a similar problem there? It's a little bit different than the cell phones, but the same type of thing.
Well,
I'm just curious your opinion, because you in this world and you've looked at different things. I don't know if you've kind of thought about that at all or not.
I haven't studied. I mean, I have a very conservative-minded brother who's always trying to get me to talk about Canada's broken healthcare system.
Yeah, so don't if it's not something. If you don't,
I'm not an expert on it. I mean, it's interesting to note though that now with dental care being partially funded, they're taking a different approach. Rather than doing single-payer dental care like we have for other kinds of healthcare, we're doing a package that's free for everyone who makes up to $90,000 for most things that they would need. So that's interesting. So effectively in dental care, the government's choosing to go two-tier, which versus it's not for primary medical procedures. It's single-payer and you have no choice. So
and they're not actually providing the service where other dentists are providing the service, and the government's rebating them.
Well, which is true now too, right? I mean, doctors, hospitals are all private enterprises in Canada. It's just that the government fixes the prices that they can charge. Mm-hmm. So that it's up to the hospitals to be more efficient if they want to make more profits. But yeah, I don't have a strong opinion.
Yeah, that's fair. I was just curious if you had looked into it. You mentioned feudalism when you were talking, which is interesting because recently, Tom more so than me has talked about like we're kind of entering a state of modern feudalism. Mm-hmm. So kind of agrees with exactly kind of what you're seeing. Whereas there's owners, no different than there was. Like the lords before, call them landlords, whatever, but if you go back to an old English society, there was, the lords in different regions. And then there was the people that just kind of like paid into their wealth essentially. And it really feels like over the last number of years, that type of system has really grown here.
It has. Well, across the Western world, again, because in our automating economy, we're producing less jobs that give meaningful amounts of pay to people who are high school educated or college educated. There's less jobs are being created. The rate of new job creation is slower, and that's due to automation. It's also could be also due to too much inequality because less spending from the bottom. Less
independent business growth too. They're actually down, right? So that more of that gets concentrated as well.
And the more concentration you have, the worse the problem becomes because who's out there outbidding families on homes? It's the people in the top 5% of earnings. So more inequality means higher prices for everybody else.
Yeah, and
right?
now it's a lot of it's companies. I don't know if I'm cutting you off. I apologize, but it's institutions that are buying up single family homes, especially in the U.S. It's starting more in Canada here, but in the U.S. you're seeing it. We just got a text from a friend that we know in Arizona state, and he was explaining to us what he's seeing there. He's like, we're just seeing these companies buy up all these single family homes. And he's like, I'm not sure it's a good thing.
No, it's not. And that's another thing land value tax would effectively disincentivize because BlackRock's, these companies are buying lots of properties, not because they're going to make a rental yield, but because they're going to expect land appreciation that they can further bank on and further leverage in the future. So LVT that's high enough would effectively mean possessing property holds no long-term benefit. The only benefit is the annual yield you get from providing a home to a family to rent from you. And that's not his business. And that's a much smaller margin than you get from land appreciation.
So go ahead.
So anyway, it's a way to kind of checkmate that behavior as opposed to regulating it. Because in California, I think that they're passing something that says that no company can own more than 1,000 single family homes. Well, why 1,000? Why not 500? Yeah. Or why not outlaw single family homes and let them only build?
They'll just start a second company.
Rental buildings.
Yeah, and they'll just start something else, a separate entity through something else and do it. I mean, there's workarounds to that all day long, right?
Yeah, but so looking back again on the automation and basic income thing, we are seeing less money going to wages, less money going to jobs. And a lot of people will say, but we can, the economy always ends up producing more jobs. But if you look at the macro of it, it's not going to working people. It's being concentrated. And if you look at previous industrial revolutions, like the move from agricultural to industrial, yes, eventually we had an industrial revolution. We had factory jobs. We had a middle class. But that didn't happen automatically. It happened because of a labor movement. It happened because of strong government intervention, like Theodore Roosevelt, creating a New Deal. It happened because of labor movement advocating for a 5-day work week. instead of working 7 days a week. Some parts of this planet, people still work 7 days a week. In China, they work 6 days a week. That's what created it. And the new jobs created due to technological progress didn't happen for the generation that was displaced. That's really important. If people walk away from only one thing from this podcast, is the benefits of automation went to people who lived 100 years later. The people who were displaced, like the Luddites, who were middle class textile workers, it didn't go to them. Right? My father and uncle, they permanently were displaced from manufacturing jobs, which no longer existed, and they're permanently on lower income. The benefits go in the future to a future generation that might find a way through the political process to extract a different form of redistribution regime, be it via labor rights or via income, like a basic income or some way like that. So I'm worried, and I think we should all be worried what's going to happen in the 5 to 10 years as more and more people's jobs are being displaced, because they're not the ones who are going to benefit from this progress in real cash disposable income terms. Maybe their great-grandchildren will, but again, through a lot of laborious and painful negotiation and political change. So I think we should just do a basic income now so that we're prepared for that, so that no one falls into poverty, so we have the means to advocate for better change, that we stop this extreme explosion in inequality that automation is creating.
Mm-hmm. We're seeing a growing number of people. I mean, it's not a huge number, but it used to be almost zero. So it's a definite trend. And other professionals we work with, and lawyers, accountants, they're seeing the same thing of people either exploring the option or leaving Canada. And they've just said, screw it, I've had enough, not interested in this place anymore. And they're gone, sometimes back to countries they've immigrated from, sometimes to a new country, whatever it is. If Canada implements something like a UBI, and there's however it's implemented, and there's a redistribution, do you think there's going to be an impact of people like, look, I'm not, and I guess I'm coming from, maybe it's a greed factor, I don't know, because if you look at what's happened, a lot of these automation jobs, manufacturing jobs, they were impacted by automation, and then more recently than that time period, they've been impacted by, call it greed, call it the chase for profits, call it whatever, where it's like we're offshoring everything to low wages, and we get rid of those jobs, and then we're importing the goods back. So we've lost jobs that way. Do you feel like there's going to be people or a segment that's just like, look, I'm not interested in this, and leave, and it's going to like impact the ability to do this? Because if the U.S., as an example, because they're our closest neighbor, isn't doing this, and we are, and then some people are like, well, look, I'm working hard and I don't want to contribute. I guess I'm answering my own question, because I'm saying I don't want to contribute. We're like, well, good, then don't contribute. You know what I mean?
Any modern economy is probably going to have to shift towards some sort of increase in capital gain. I personally don't favor a broad capital gains tax like we have in the US and Canada. I would favor separating entrepreneurial profits from profits, say, from just appreciation of an asset. Those could be taxed differently.
So if someone's busted their butt to build a business that's employing people and contributing to the business, versus someone that gets the GO station built next to their house.
That's right. Yeah. So like active income separate from simple asset appreciation, capital gains sort of captures those both right now as one thing, which is really stupid. But at the end of the day, most modern economies will have to tax capital more than it is today. So if people who are thinking of leaving the country because they've probably amassed enough wealth that they can, first of all, they're going to do it anyway, right? I know someone who's moved to Panama. Like, that's happened, right? It's just going to happen more. But any country where people actually want to live and raise families, will have to shift taxes more towards capital to sustain this automation wave, to do something about the fact that the tax base is shrinking. Middle class jobs are shrinking. There's nowhere to go. So yeah, if you're wealthy enough to move to the Caymans, you'll move to the Caymans anyway, right? I don't think the average family is going to move, because wherever they're going to move will face a similar change, unless it's someplace smart like Texas, which has high property taxes, which indirectly is a high land value tax.
Do they have high property taxes? I didn't know that.
It's like double or triple what you'd see in Canada.
Oh wow.
Yeah, an average, like a good home there, we tax like $20,000-$25,000.
And you say that's smart because of why?
Because you're taxing idle wealth as opposed to taxing productivity. So there's no income tax in Texas. So businesses are moving there, people are moving there. Instead, they're paying more in property tax. And the government of Texas also has a lot of social land, publicly owned land that is leased out, and those leasing revenues goes towards a fund that is paying for the high school system. So they're using public property, effectively using assets, to cause the fact that no one there has to pay income tax, and it's working. Similar in Alaska, they're using oil revenues that went into an investment fund, and that fund was paying people dividends, $2,000 a year each. Alaska is a red state. It's the most equal state in the United States, where a UBI of sorts, $2,000 a year per person in the past, is the reason for that. And so instead of all that money going to private oil companies, they're using it for public purpose, and they have no income tax because of the oil, of this asset they have, oil revenues. So yeah,
well,
I don't.
Instead of us, well, we'll build the 407 and then lease it out to make our books look good for a few years.
So ridiculous.
And then let someone else just grab all the profit from it.
And that is, to go back to the economics term, the profits of the company that owns the 407 is pure economic rent.
Yeah.
They own the land and they're renting you the chance to drive on it. They're not working for it. The actual component of the profit that is work and maintaining the actual asphalt and all that shit is probably like a small fraction of the profit they make. That is a monopoly. Government is not. Any government of an effective market system should not allow monopoly.
We formed it essentially when we put it up for sale.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's monopoly. Another thing, like Doug Ford recently, they were going to give away the greenbelt, right? Like take out parts of the greenbelt to property developers. There's going to be $9 billion of land value growth happening just because of the regulation change, the upzoning change that would have gone to private hands, which should be public property because those developers didn't create that value increase. We created it by agreeing to upzone, right? So like there's just, it's all backwards. So in Texas, they don't tax incomes. They tax property more, and they have public property.
Yeah. So don't tax the productive side of the economy.
Yeah.
Right. People that are contributing, doing things, but the idle side, you can use some of that to offset some stuff.
So if you did that, I don't think people would be moving to Panama or the Caymans, because if you're wealthy and you have business interests, you're not going to move just because your property tax is like maybe a fraction in Caymans than it would be here, because you're making a lot of money from your business. So not having the income tax is worth more than having a higher property tax. And working class families near the poverty line,
it helps them
with the basic income would be able to afford those taxes. They could afford to buy a home.
But then the argument is I guess against that is some people are going to look at it and go, well, this guy makes $1 million a year. This guy only makes 50 grand. Why is he not paying income tax? And why is it even? He should be paying income tax based on the money. Because you'll get like there's always some I guess there's always going to be people arguing about who should be contributing what, right?
Yeah, right. And I think what we have to do to survive the next 30 years is try to arrive at what sources of income are directly tied to automation, to monopoly, to contributions that are to money that was collectively created as opposed to individually created. Try and find a way to tax that less, and then tax working incomes more. Like we probably shouldn't have any income tax for the first 80,000 of people up to the median wage. And instead, you could tax more unproductive sources of value creation, so that most people don't have to pay income tax, but those who are the most successful still do, because part of their income has come from society's progress and not from their own ingenuity.
Yeah, because the argument is then that the increase in funds goes into the community, into local businesses, and helps everyone. And
funding the next generation. People need to afford to go to school.
Yeah. And I know we got to wrap up, but I'm just forgive me. I forget. Do you have kids, or you had one on the way?
I have a daughter. She's under 2 years old. Right?
Oh, okay, a young one. Okay, that's why I thought there was one even. It was almost even younger than that. So you have a daughter, and you're thinking about all this stuff, and you mentioned the kids. So when she's old enough for this conversation, which you might actually be having this with, knowing you might be having this conversation with her now when she's going to sleep. I'm not sure, but that might be the bedtime story. Yeah. So what are you going to like? You're just an interesting guy, man. You have interesting thoughts and stuff. And and I mean that like in a positive way for sure. What are you going to share with her? Like, what's the one lesson in all this, or the one big thing that you kind of want to pass on to other people or to your kids so that they understand? Like, what is that?
If I were to just pick one thing, obviously assuming she's a nice person and morals and all that, but one thing about the economic side, which I'm nerdy about, would be to recognize that our relationship to nature, like nature, the value generated by the natural resources should not be privately earned. It should be publicly shared. We only deserve the amount in profit back from dealing with nature, whether it's land or oil or minerals or that is accrued from the work we have to do to extract it. From actual labor, from actual work. Everything else is public property. So I want her to understand that. And let me make that a little simpler. Like if the market sets the value of timber or of minerals or of land, it's not the owner of it. The market sets that value. The person doing the extraction, whether it's oil or minerals or nodules on the ocean floor that will create batteries for their electrified future, the amount required to pay the workers to do the extraction, the amount required to pay back the investors in a competitive capital market, maybe it's like a 20% growth, a 30% return based on the risk, is enough. And the rest of that profit is set by society, belongs to society. I would want her to have an intuitive understanding of that, because I think that's the answer of how we get to a Star Trek future, where the value, no one profits from the value of land. They profit from what they do with the land, right? And that's a big difference from what we have right now. If we can solve that, if we can find a way for that, for like publicly created value from nature to directly benefit everyone, we will never have poverty. We will have environmental sustainability. We'll have more respect for nature. And we will have a future where you only get what you've earned, right? Like if you work hard, you earn it, that's yours. But what's created collectively belongs to everyone. And I think that's the kind of future I want to live in. I want her to live in. It's a wonderful future that is naturally more conservationist, naturally saves more of the green space, and has no poverty. Mm-hmm. And is still capitalist. And it's still freedom, based on freedom.
It's definitely a different way to look at it than, I guess, the way that it's been explained to me in the past by most people doesn't account for that. It's just like, hey, people need money. It's a much more simplistic, and I just appreciate that level of it. And I appreciate you coming in, man. Like it's always interesting speaking with you. Like I said before, I'll say it again. It's your thoughts. They're well thought out. And there's different opinions of them for sure and stuff like that. And I appreciate the fact that you're willing to have that conversation and kind of, to help myself and people understand it. The websites for people that want to check out further information is at UBIWorks.
UBI Works for basic income, Commonwealth Canada for that future economy and land value tax.
Are they both .com or .ca?
.ca.
So UBIWorks.ca and CommonWealth.ca.
Yeah.
Cool. And if they want to find you, are you?
I'm very active on Twitter. Yeah.
Spreading the word.
Twitter and TikTok. Yeah, I just post these ideas out there. This interview is going to be clipped and posted there multiple times.
Spreading the word, and then outside of that, we'll find you trekking through a forest somewhere, sometime.
And working remotely from an office in a forest.
Yeah. Cool, Floyd. Thank you very much, man. Genuinely appreciate it.
All right.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. You can find every new episode of the Your Life, Your Terms show on all the major streaming platforms. So Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. And if you'd like to get free copies of some of the books that we've put together, like these right here, or some of the reports that we've put together, like these right here, you can find all of those at www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's it for now. Until next time, your life, your terms.